you've been following me for a while, you may recall some past videos in which I discussed modes of limited transposition. A mode of limited transposition is a scale in which there are more notes than there are possible modes of that scale. In a major scale, for instance, starting the scale on any of its degrees will produce a unique mode or pattern of intervals. In a mode of limited transposition, multiple rotations of the scale will share an identical pattern of intervals. Due to this symmetrical nature, these scales are considered atonal in that no pitch within them can be perceived as tonic or root or home pitch. For example, the whole tone scale, which is a 6-note scale comprised entirely of whole steps between each pitch, only has one mode. No matter which note you start on, it's always nothing but whole steps, so none of the notes are any more tense or resolved than the others. Only 7 modes of limited transposition are mathematically possible in our 12-tone system of organizing musical pitches. The French composer Olivier Messiaen cataloged these in his 1944 book, The Technique of My Musical Language. I've made videos discussing 3 of them so far. Today we'll be looking at Messiaen Mode 4. Messiaen Mode 4 doesn't have another name. We can just call it Mode 4 for short. Mode 4 is a variety of octatonic scale in that it contains 8 pitches, although usually when people say octatonic scale, they're referring to the diminished scale, which is Mode 2 in Messiaen's list. Mode 4 follows a very different pattern of intervals than the diminished scale. From our starting pitch, it goes semitone, semitone, minor third, semitone, 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 minor third, semitone. So 2 semitones, a minor third, 3 semitones, a minor third, and 1 semitone. It might be a little hard to see the symmetry in this, but one thing every mode of limited transposition has in common is a tritone interval, such as between C and G flat. The tritone, called that because it's an interval of 3 whole tones, is the only interval smaller than an octave that is inherently symmetrical. If you invert the notes of a tritone, you still end up with a tritone. Because of that, it acts as the axis of symmetry for these symmetrical scales. So if we look at the pattern up to G flat, we have 2 semitones, a minor third, and a semitone. Going from G flat up to C, we have the same pattern. So because the upper half of the scale will always be identical to the lower half in its interval pattern, this scale only has 4 possible modes. We can also have a semitone, minor third, and 2 semitones. We can have a minor third and then 3 semitones. Or we can have 3 semitones, then a minor third. Cool. Theory. Math. What about chord possibilities? Usually when we think about building chords from a scale, our default is to build them by combining every other note. And we can still do that here. We'll use the rotation of the scale that starts with 2 semitones for this. It doesn't really matter which one you use. And I'm going to make all of these chords have 4 notes as if I'm building 7th chords. I could build triads, but it's just going to make this demonstration more circuitous and confusing than it needs to be. We're going to reach the same conclusion either way, so I'm just going to streamline it as much as I can. First, we get C, D, G flat, A flat, then D flat, F, G, B, then D, G flat, A flat, C, which is the same 4 notes as the first one in a different inversion. Then F, G, B, and D flat, the same 4 notes as the second one. And yeah, that's going to keep happening. It makes sense, right? If you have 8 notes total, you can only make 2 4-note chords this way. You can have one set of 4 notes or the other set of 4 notes. So what are these chords? What I want to do here is see if these arrange into what we'll call everyday chords. something that we're familiar with, that isn't just an arbitrary, meaningless cluster of pitches. To do that, we want to try to respell them in some kind of stacked thirds voicing. So with the first one, if I respell the G flat as F sharp and shuffle the notes around a little, I get a D7 flat 5. If I shuffle around the notes of the second chord, I get a G7 flat 5. Now, a dominant 7 flat 5 chord is somewhat of a unique harmony in that it possesses an internal symmetry. If you invert it so it's over its fifth, it just becomes another dominant 7 flat 5 chord with a root a tritone away. D7 flat 5 is the same as A flat 7 flat 5, and G7 flat 5 is the same as D flat 7 flat 5. They have an inherent symmetry not totally unlike augmented chords or diminished seventh chords. It's sort of like they have a tritone substitution baked right into them, if you know what that is. I won't go into it, I've talked about it in other videos. So all four of those are found within Messiaen Mode 4, which makes sense because Mode 4 also has tritone symmetry. Really, because both pairs of these chords are enharmonically the same, it would be fair to say that Mode 4 is comprised of two dominant 7 flat 5 chords rooted a semitone apart from each other. Okay, now the big questions. So what? Why should you care about any of that? What do you do with this scale? What is it good for? The huge potential here lies in the fact that there are multiple dominant seventh chords living within this scale. A dominant 7 flat 5 is a type of altered dominant chord. You hear them a lot in jazz, but they're by no means limited to that style. The root, third, and seventh are the essential tones of a dominant chord. Any other notes, like the fifth or the ninth, can be raised or lowered by a semitone to amp up the tension. Examples would be D7 flat 9, D7 sharp 9, D7 flat 5 sharp 9. Any combination of raised or lowered fifths and or ninths. Lowering the fifth is a super common way of altering a dominant seventh chord. All this to say, in a solo, this scale fits very nicely over the top of a dominant seventh chord. But only two of the four possible modes will work. You can use the mode starting with one semitone, or you can use the one starting with a minor third. The ones starting with 2 or 3 semitones will only work if you're lining them up with the third or seventh of the dominant chord you're playing over. Just something to be aware of. Even though this is an atonal scale, if you insert it over a tonal harmony, that harmony will give it the context it needs to fit. I think the scale would feel right at home in the blues. It has a lot of bluesy patterns hiding within it. I'll let you go hunting for them. To bring this all together, here are a couple little solos over a 2-5-1 progression using Mode 4. I'm going to use Mode 4 over the 5 chord in both, but in one I'll use the mode starting with one semitone, and in the other I'll use the mode starting with a minor third. Hopefully you'll pick up on some different colors depending on which you use. Okay, that was some big information. This scale, as far as I can tell, doesn't get talked about a whole lot, except by like the most hardcore jazz improvisers. What I went over is just one way of using it in soloing and improvising. It can, of course, be used in composition as well. That's how Messiaen used it. Composers of atonal music have used it plenty over the years. You hear these scales in film scores fairly often. There are a lot of colorful harmonic and melodic possibilities in there that are worth exploring, but I will leave that to you. It seems like one of the most asked questions among students of music is, how would you go about improvising over XYZ? To be able to answer that question for yourself, you need to know what scales pair with what chords. All that analytical dissection of this scale I went through is how you figure that out for yourself. Granted, it's usually not this complicated. The Messiaen Modes are these abstract synthetic scales, so the answer isn't always staring you straight in the face. I didn't get the idea to use this scale over dominant chords from anywhere. I just took the scale, pulled it apart, looked for possibilities, found some, and tried to apply them. The analysis proves that it should hypothetically work, but in the end, I let my ears be the judge. So currently, I have some openings for private Zoom lessons. I teach one-on-one guitar and music theory lessons to people around the world. If that's something you might be interested in, feel free to message me directly on whatever platform you're viewing this on, or go here and fill out the contact form. If you'd like to support the creation of future videos and other music stuff, purchasing some of my exercise books in my store is a great way to do that. My $5 all-purpose daily exercise book, Morning Coffee, is a popular one. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you in the next one.